Well, we've been talking about relationships, we've been talking about friendships, and the two are very similar. Sometimes your romantic relationship is your best friend, sometimes it's not, but we're applying those principles right across the board. And if you weren't here last week, I'd encourage you to listen to the podcast. We're going to continue with looking at the relationships between David, Jonathan and Saul. But thinking about relationships, I came across this online during the past week and I thought it was funny. Some people in the first service thought it was funnier than others. It's called Man versus Woman. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just going to read it. Some of them are more true than others, but some of them definitely are applicable. Nicknames. If Laura, Kate and Sarah go out for lunch, they will call each other Laura, Kate and Sarah. If Mike, Dave and John go out, they affectionately refer to each other as Fat Boy, Butthead and Four Eyes. Eating out. When the bill arrives, Mike, Dave and John will each throw in £20, even though the bill is £43.50. None of them will have anything smaller and none will actually admit they want change back. When the girls get their bill, out come the pocket calculators. A man will pay £2 for a £1 item he needs. A woman will pay £1 for a £2 item she doesn't need, but it's on sale. Bathrooms. A man has 6 items in his bathroom: toothbrush, toothpaste, shaving cream, razor, bar of soap, towel. The average number of items in a typical woman's bathroom is 337. A man would not be able to identify any more than 20 of these items, and neither do we want to, gentlemen. Arguments. A woman has the last word in any argument. Anything a man says after that is the beginning of a new argument. Marriage. There's an awkward laughter from the married people in here. A woman marries a man expecting he will change, but he doesn't. A man marries a woman expecting that she won't change, but she does. Dressing up. A man will dress up to go shopping. A woman will dress up to go shopping, water the plants, empty the bin, answer the phone, read a book and walk the dog. A man will dress up for weddings and funerals. Men wake up. Even Becky had to agree this one was true. Men wake up as good looking as they went to bed. I'm just saying. Women somehow deteriorate during the night. I didn't write them, folks. You don't shoot the postman if he delivers mail you don't like, okay? Lastly, offspring. A woman knows all about her children. She knows about dentist appointments and romances, best friends, favourite foods, secret fears and hopes and dreams. A man is vaguely aware of some short people living in his house. We're thinking about relationships. We're thinking about just how we can have healthy relationships and how we can avoid toxic relationships. And we're going to think about both of those today. And last week, we saw that Saul had been anointed king of Israel, but then God's favour and blessing had lifted off him. Originally, he had been very reluctant to take on the role, but eventually he gets to the stage where so much of his identity is caught up in the role, in that title and position of king, that even though God has told him, I don't want you to be king any longer, he literally holds on to it for dear life. And we saw that in our own lives, when we hold on to things that God is trying to get us to let go of, we're actually cutting ourselves off from the future that God has for us. Saul is, we've learned this all along, he's a people pleaser, he is proud, and he is insecure. And people like that tend to be very sensitive. People like that you're walking on eggshells around them. You're always afraid of saying the wrong thing or even looking at them the wrong way. It's almost like they're constantly looking for a way to be offended. I don't know if you've ever met anyone like that. They're a lot of fun to be around. There was one, I've met people throughout church, but there was one particular guy I remember who was in his 50s, and he would come to me and he would say, Craig, I want you to answer me honestly, which really subtext was, I want you to lie and tell me what I want to hear. But he would keep saying, I want you to tell me the truth. And he would ask you a question. And you would give him the slightest hint of truth. And he would go berserk. Like you would be getting 43 emails for the next week. You think he literally at one stage, I think, threatened to take somebody to court for defamation of character. I mean, it's just, he went out of control. But he was just so hypersensitive about everything, and he was in a position of responsibility, and that was very difficult. Well, when I arrived, he was anyway. That changed, but he stayed around, and actually, the next minister actually found, quite honestly, the next minister and him just parted ways in the end. He left the church, this guy, in the end, because he just couldn't handle. He wanted the truth, but he didn't want the truth, and you were constantly trying to appease them and placate them, and that's very hard to do. But that's what Saul was like. Saul was hypersensitive. He was hypersensitive to any hint of criticism in his life, and hence we find a few problems coming up in chapter 18. Let me read verses 6 to 9. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines and songs of joy and with musical instruments. Must have been Pentecostal. They've got their tambourines. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry. And this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but my kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. So they're coming home from war. In those days, you didn't just go out and fight one war. There was a season for war. They're coming back from fighting the Philistines and any other battles. The men are coming home. The women and children are glad to have their husbands and their fathers back. And so they're out in the street and they're singing and they're dancing and they're cheering and they're celebrating. And one woman, just one woman, decides to sing a song, okay? Just one woman in the crowd. We don't know who she was, but one woman decides to make up a song, and the song starts like this. Saul has killed his thousands. You know, Saul loved that line. That's a catchy line. He's probably thinking, let's, put a beat behind that. Let's make it into a dance record. Let's get it playing in the Belmont on the coach. If that's where the song had finished, everything would have been just fine. But no, for some reason, this one woman who decided to start this song decides that it needs a little bit more lyrics to it, okay? And so she adds a second line, and the second line is this. The first line is, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Like, what was she thinking? Saul was there. He was right there, and you can imagine David going, shut up. Like, seriously, woman, shush. Psst. And next thing, but it's like the sash on the 12th, everybody's singing it. It's catching on quicker than chicken pox and P2. And everybody's catching on to this song, and everybody's singing it, and Saul's sitting there, and really, like, what were they thinking? Like, one of the most overlooked spiritual gifts is tactfulness. Like, common sense, just thinking before you speak. Like, was the saying true? It had a semblance of truth. Was it helpful? No! Like, just because something is true doesn't mean you have to say it. Sometimes we do that, don't we? We go, well, it's true, so I just have to say it. I just have to let them know what I think. It's true. You don't have to tell them it's true. Sometimes just keep it to yourself. Some things are better left unsaid. And even if it is true, don't make a song and dance about it. Tell them personally, tell them privately. Go to David, say, well done, big lad, wee lad even. You've done a good job. But you don't have to tell everyone about it. This one song, one stupid little song caused so much trouble. It's amazing how one tactless comment can cause trouble, isn't it? How one small, stupid remark. I remember in another place, one remark from two lifelong friends. One said something to the other, and all hell broke loose. And they're still not friends. They were best friends for years. One tactless remark. And if we would just learn just to think before we speak, just to engage our brains before we engage. Just because something is true, if it's not helpful, it doesn't have to be said. That stupid little song led to David having to spend 10 years on the run as a fugitive. Like he said, the first line was fine. That's what caught Saul's attention. Saul has killed his thousands. Like, in those days, that was a compliment, okay? I mean, if you said that today, Craig has killed his thousands, that just means I'm a really good serial killer. That's not a compliment today, but back there, it meant you were valiant, you were a warrior, you were brave, you were someone to be respected. You were someone who had led the military really well. Go, Saul! But it was the next line that ruined the first one. But David has tens of thousands. That totally ruined. You see, Saul has killed his thousands, put Saul up here. But when David has killed his tens of thousands, Saul went down here and David went up there. And the problem wasn't what they sang about Saul, it was what they sang about David in comparison. The issue here is comparison. And when you're an insecure, proud people pleaser, that's going to cause problems. It's going to damage any fragile ego. Somebody has said this: comparison kills joy. I would say that's absolutely true. Comparison kills joy. Comparison kills relationships. Comparison kills peace. Comparison kills families at times. It kills happiness. Comparison can even kill marriages. We do it and we don't even realize we're doing it. We compare ourselves to other people. Men, we do it in all sorts of ways, and sometimes we do it, like when the first thing men, when they meet other men is, what do we ask? We say, what do you do? And a lot of the time it's not comparison, it's just men are really awkward when we're talking to each other. Like really, men are kind of socially stunted when we meet other men who we don't know. And so it's just easier to ask, what do you do? But sometimes it can be kind of like trying to figure out where you are in the pecking order. It can be to do with where do you live, or what sort of house, or what sort of car do you drive, or whatever. We do it with our status. We do it with our jobs. We do it with our looks sometimes. Now, no woman in this room has ever done this, okay? I'm talking about women out there. But have you ever seen a group of women, and an attractive woman walks into the room and they go and look her up and down? Like I say, no, it's never happening here. But it's like they're judging them. They're making assumptions about them. They're comparing themselves to them, and it's done so constantly that we sometimes don't even realize we're doing it. Kids do it. Kids do it from a very young age. They're comparing themselves to other kids in different ways. Who's the oldest? Like when you're in P2, being the oldest is cool. When you're 45, it's not, or 55 or 65. You don't want to be the oldest anymore. But we're constantly comparing ourselves and figuring out where we fit in the pecking order in relation to other people. And we tend to do this with people who are similar than us. Similar to us. We tend to compare ourselves mostly to people who have some similarities to us. Like, let me give you an example. Like, I don't care if you were to say, Ben's a great footballer. Ben's so much better a footballer than you are, okay? I don't care about football. It doesn't concern me at all. But when I get a piece of promotional literature for a Christian conference through the door, and one of my peers is the main speaker, there's this little niggle that goes on inside me going, I wonder why he was invited to speak as the main speaker and not me. Now, you all know why they were invited and not me. But I have this, like it happened a number of years ago. Like there was one guy who was invited to speak at this huge conference in the UK, and he's one of my peers. And I was kind of like, I wonder how they figured out to invite him, I wonder how he got invited. And I'm just being really honest, and it can happen in all sorts of ways. Maybe it's somebody in work gets promoted, and you've been there 3 years longer than them, and you start to think, why were they promoted and not me? Maybe your best friend gets engaged after meeting, a fella and she's been with him 4 weeks, and you've been with your bloke for 5 years and he still hasn't got down on one knee, and you're like, I'm really pleased for you. Well done, congratulations. You know, and being like more seriously, like maybe you're struggling to conceive, and it feels like your best friend every time she looks at her husband, she's pregnant again. And that's just like, again, I'm really pleased for you. Like, but it's hard because you're comparing yourself to them. Maybe your neighbor gets a new car and you're like, must be a midlife crisis. You know, I don't know, like the guy in the gym, same age as you, has bigger muscles, so it must be in steroids. Okay, that's just my thing. But we all do it subconsciously. We're constantly comparing ourselves to people around us. And it only becomes an issue when we feel threatened by them. And sometimes when we feel threatened, here's what we do. And we would never admit this out loud. We think, well, I need to bring them back down. If they're up there and I feel like I'm down there, I need to bring them down a peg or two. That tall poppy syndrome, I need to bring them back down to earth a little bit. And we start to think negatively about them. We maybe start to talk about them. Even though they've maybe done nothing wrong. In fact, they may actually only have been really nice to us. They may only have been really helpful to us in the past. They've never done anything. But if we feel threatened by people, it's amazing how we can start to look for evidence to back up the verdict that we've already made about them. Then when we have decided we don't like someone for some reason, even if it's completely irrational, we will start to try to find evidence to support that verdict. They may do 55 wonderful things one day, but they may do one small thing that we don't like, and we latch on to the 56th thing that we don't like. And that's what we focus on. And we say, I told you they were like that. I told you they were big-headed and that. And we start to try to diminish them, feeling as if somehow diminishing them will exalt us, when actually it just diminishes us as well. And the problem with that is that it can start to fester in our lives. It can start to grow. It can start to consume us. And we're going to see in a moment that's what happened with Saul. I'm not sure if I've told this story before, but as I said in the first service, most of you don't remember what I said 5 minutes ago. So if I've told it 6 months ago, we're fine. Quite a number of years ago, before we were married, I was going on a holiday with a few mates for 2 weeks. And we came back, and I had driven to the airport, and we came back to the international airport, and opened the car door, and the stench, and I mean, my car's not the cleanest, the best at times, but the stench was unreal. It was putrid, it was stinking, it was disgusting, it was foul. Did you get in the drift? It was absolutely rancid. You'd have thought there'd been a dead body in the back. And we were like, what is that smell? And we got home, and I decided I needed to clean out the car, and I investigated, and there was the decomposed remains of a chicken burger under the back seat of the car. And what had happened was, on the way to the airport, we'd got peckish, we'd stopped in the chippy. One of my former friends had bought a chicken burger, and he'd eaten half of it and decided rather than find a bin when we left, he would just put it under the back seat of the car. Now, that happened to be 2 hot weeks in the summer, where that for 2 weeks, that chicken burger in the heat of my car decomposed and became something absolutely stinking. If they'd have thrown it out when we got it to the airport, it wouldn't have been a problem. But when you let something fester, when you ignore something, when you don't pay attention to something, it begins to stink, it begins to fester, it begins to rot, and it begins to actually stink out not just a small, but it stinks out everything around it. And that's what happens with comparison. Because comparison leads to jealousy, and jealousy leads to bitterness, and bitterness leads to anger, and anger leads to unforgiveness. And we find ourselves in this place from a small comment, from a small thing that happened, and suddenly this thing has festered because we haven't dealt with it, and it actually has started to consume us. Paul talks a bit about this in Ephesians 4. He's talking about relationships. And he says this. He says, in your anger, do not sin. Notice he differentiates. There's nothing wrong. You can be angry, but don't let it become sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. And that doesn't mean stay up and fight all night, okay? And do not give the devil a foothold. He's talking about anger, and he's saying if you don't deal with anger quickly, if you don't deal with resentment and bitterness quickly, what you're doing there is actually giving the devil a foothold in your life. And that word foothold, I looked it up in the Greek yesterday. It means a place or a space. A place or a space. In other words, when you hold bitterness and anger and resentment towards someone, what you're doing is you're creating a little space in your life for the devil, for demons, for demonic influence, for satanic influence. You're actually creating a little place, a little landing strip, if you like, a little foothold, a little place where he can get in and start to niggle and start to have influence. And what happens over time, and we see this with Saul, is that actually that foothold, if it's not dealt with, becomes a stronghold. And you become someone who, I'd say we all know people like this. People who don't just get angry occasionally, but they're an angry person. I see it with young men walking around. There's a lot of angry young men walking around today. They're angry at life. They're angry at that things haven't turned out. They're angry at everybody. There's bitter people. I remember one lady came to me at a service years ago, and her face was almost a very middle-class, well-to-do lady in her 60s, but her face was almost contorted with anger and bitterness and unforgiveness. And she told me something her brother had done 33 years before that she hadn't been able to forgive him for. And this literally was consuming her. It was absolutely destroying her. And I said, what about your brother? She said, oh, he's as happy as Larry. He's fine. And I said, so basically, as the old saying goes, you've drank the poison and you're expecting him to die. Like this is destroying you. And that's what can happen if we don't deal with this stuff. It can control and dominate your life. And that's what happens with Saul. It actually says that evil spirits were given access to his life at this point. I mean, and when you think about it, what had David done to him? David had only ever helped him. David had fought the giant that everybody was expecting Saul to fight, but Saul didn't want to fight. David had won battles for him. David had been loyal to him. David had been faithful to him. David had done nothing but serve him. He should have been giving David a medal, not throwing a spear at him. But when we become irrational, we justify it in our own minds. We find ways to justify our anger. We find ways to justify our resentment. We find ways, and we try to bring other people in on it to say, we want to garner support. And yet, it destroys us. So how do we deal with that? How do we avoid the comparison trap? How do we nip this? How do we get rid of the burger before it starts to stink out the car? How do we nip this in the bud quickly? 3 things really quickly. First one is this: realize you're unique. God did not make you like anyone else. You're an absolute original. Some of you much more than others. But you are not like anyone else. Therefore, you cannot be compared to anyone else because you're one of a kind. You cannot compare one of a kind to anybody else. And so when you compare yourself to somebody else, you're actually diminishing the uniqueness that God placed in your life. You're not like somebody else. No, I'm going to leave that story. I told it in the first service, and I just needed to get it off my chest, and I did it in the first one. But our Elijah, he's not the most sporty in the world. He loves fighting and he loves wrestling, and he might like content. But when it comes to athletics, like for P1 Sports Day, he came last in every race. I mean, that's a gift to be able to come last in all. Like that's, this year he came second last, so he's making progress, the wee man. But we're not going to tell him every day, why don't you train to be an athlete? He's got the chubby Cooney legs. It's just not going to happen, okay? But he's got brains to burn. And so, we're encouraging him in the things he's good at. We're encouraging him. And what I'm trying to say is this, is that, all right, the story was this. I'm going to tell you it, because a little boy arrives at our door. I told Christine this the other week. A little boy arrives at our door. She had more sympathy than me. About a month ago, calls for Elijah. He's wearing a gold medal around his neck. I say, you've got a gold medal. He said, yes, Sports Day today. I said, well done. That's fantastic. That's amazing. Elijah goes out to play with him, comes back in. I say, it's great that such and such had a gold medal. He said, yeah, he came last. I said, what? He said, he came last. I said, why is he wearing a gold medal? He said, I asked him that. The teachers give every child a gold medal because they don't want anyone to feel bad. Like, what the heck? Seriously. And this is me 4 weeks later. Like, I'm probably opening myself to anger about this, but I'm getting it out of my system now. Like, seriously. Like, what is going wrong with the world? Like, you know what? If everybody wins, nobody wins. That's a problem. And we wonder why we've got a bunch of 20-somethings who are hypersensitive and offended by every single thing anybody says that they don't agree with. Maybe it's because everybody got a trophy. You know, when you get out into the real world, not everybody gets a trophy. You turn up late for work, you don't get a trophy. You don't have your report in on time, you don't get a trophy. You're nasty to your boss, you don't get a trophy. If you're ignorant to other people, you don't get a trophy. So why are we teaching our kids that everybody gets a trophy, even if you come last? You know what we're doing? We're actually diminishing the way God made them, because that's not fair on the kids who are sporty. That little boy who got the gold medal is going to grow up with delusions. And he's really smart and he's really funny, but he's going to think he's really good at sports, and he's not. He came last. I said this to Elijah. We talked about it, and Elijah said, I would give the guy who came first my medal. And I'm like, good man. Like, because really, we need to teach our kids that they're unique. That they're special in their own way. That God didn't make them like every other kid. But they are God's masterpiece. Each one of them were knit together in their mother's womb. And they are fearfully and wonderfully made, as Psalm 139 tells us. And that they're not to compare themselves to every other kid, because they are special. And if we don't do that, kids are going to grow up comparing themselves to things that they're not good at. I say to my son, focus on what you're good at. I would say this to every parent. This is just practical advice for you. 30 years ago, it was be really good at lots of things, jack of all trades. Today, be really good at one or two things. And I say this to Elijah, and I say, find one or two things that you love, that you're good at, that people are willing to pay money for, and that a computer or a robot won't be doing in 20 years. True. That's really good advice, parents. Find something your kid loves, that they're good at, because they're going to spend 45 years working at it. Why not? I have so many friends who are doing jobs that they hate 20 years in, but they're stuck in them. Something they love, something they're good at, something people are willing to pay for, and something that a robot or a computer can't do in 20 years, and they will be fine. That could be a plumber. It could be an electrician. It could be, many things. It doesn't have to be a doctor or a lawyer. But find something they're passionate about and allow them to express the uniqueness that God has placed inside them. Oh, I feel better now. Secondly, celebrate the success of others. Their success does not equate to your failure. Because they're skinny doesn't mean you're fat. Unless you're fat, then you're still fat. Whether they're skinny or fat, it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to get into I'm going on holidays soon. I don't care. When someone gets a promotion, doesn't mean you were demoted. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. When somebody gets mentioned, it doesn't mean you're overlooked. Like, there's something lovely about being able to celebrate. That person who got speaking at a conference a few years ago, I don't do this all the time, folks, I have to be honest. Most of the time I just get jealous and get over it. But this guy, I actually emailed him, or I sent him a message, I emailed him, and I said, I see you're speaking. Like, that's fantastic. And I emailed him afterwards saying, how did it go? And you know what? That broke something of that bitterness. That broke something of that comparison, of that resentment of, that should have been me. When you celebrate, when one of your friends do well, celebrate with them. When one of your friends is getting married, celebrate with them. And I think what that does is it actually opens you up for God's favor in your own life when you honor what God's doing in somebody else's life. But when you get bitter and angry, it just closes you off to that. Like, if somebody has done something well and you'd like to be able to do it, why not just say to them, I'd love to be able to do that too. Would you show me how you do that? If somebody's a good parent, we look at other parents, and sometimes we go, every parent thinks they're destroying their child, okay? We all think, our children are going to grow up to be criminals, like the way we... But But then we look at other parents and we go, they're so good. Like those, that family have got 3 kids in there. And we would like to ask them, how did you do this? How did you raise 3 kids to be so, like, such well-mannered, good kids? Like, there's something, it'll help you, but it'll also help them to go, oh, I thought I was doing a terrible job, but thank you for that. There's something about celebrating other people's successes and stay in your lane. I've already said this, stay in your lane. I am not good at a lot of things. There's like 100 things I'm terrible at and about 1 or 2 things I'm good at. That's what I focus on. Because if I were to focus on the things that, just say I'm a 4 at things. If I work really hard at the 4, I'll make them a 6. Like, what's the point when there's 8s and 10s? Why not focus on the things I'm good at naturally, when the things I'm drawn to, the things I'm passionate about? Make myself as good as I can be and surround myself with people who are 8s, 9s, and 10s in the things I'm not good at. That's called church. That's called team. That's called leadership. Knowing what you're good at and surrounding yourself with people who complement you. It almost sounds like something Paul would say in 1 Corinthians when he talks about the body. That we need the head, we need the legs, we need the arms, and we're all different. We're all created to work together. Where are you fixing your focus? May 1954, Roger Bannister was the first person to run the 4-minute mile. But a month later, John Landy, an Australian, smashed that record. Then the 2 men had a race together. John Landy was in the head for most of the race. But in the final stretch, he looked around to see where Roger Bannister was. And as he looked around, Roger Bannister overtook him and won the race. If he had kept his focus straight ahead, he would have won. But he was too concerned with comparing himself to where somebody else was. In Hebrews 12, it says this: let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus and run the race that he has set out for us. That's where we fix our focus on Jesus. But look at what it says about Saul, about where Saul fixed his focus in 1 Samuel 18. From that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Fix your focus on Jesus. Saul kept a close eye on David. Wherever you fix your focus will determine where your attention goes, and it will determine where your emotion goes, and it will determine how your life goes. So Saul is completely miserable. He literally becomes a man possessed and obsessed with clinging on to something that God doesn't want him to keep. But where does this leave his son Jonathan? Because remember last week we saw that Jonathan and David are best friends forever. They're BFFs. They're best buddies. They love each other. They've had this covenant bond. But that's a bit awkward if your dad is trying to kill your best friend. So where does that leave him? Let's look at 19:1-6. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him and I'll tell you what I find out. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He's not wronged you. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and you were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Just a few things real quickly here. First one is this. True friends warn their friends of danger. True friends warn their friends of danger. Now, and here it was physical danger. But it can be all sorts of danger. When you see somebody who's your friend going down a path that you know is not going to lead somewhere good, the natural tendency is to say, I want to avoid conflict. I'll say nothing. I don't want to confront it. And then 3 weeks later, 3 months later, they've messed up their lives, their career, their marriage, their family. When a real friend will actually say, can we go for coffee? And they'll risk the confrontation and they'll risk the conflict. Because real friends stop other friends going over a cliff, even if it means discomfort. And when we see our friends going into danger, it's really important that we have people who can speak into our lives and people whose lives we can speak into. That's how you know you've got a good relationship with someone. When somebody can confront something in your life and you don't take it hyper personally and sensitively, but that you trust them enough that they only want what's good for you. Not everybody has that right to speak into your life. Let me just say that. But there should be people who do have that right, that you know they only want what's best for you, and so that if they speak into your life and they express concern, you know it's out of love. Proverbs 27:6 says this: wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. In other words, not everyone who kisses up to you is your friend. Just because people say nice things about you or nice things to you doesn't mean they're your friend. Sometimes your friend will actually say things that wound you. But sometimes the wound is ultimately for your healing. And what else does he do? Verse 4, Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father. A true friend is someone who talks about you behind your back, but they say good things. A true friend is someone who, when you're not in the room, you know your back's covered. A true friend is someone who is loyal even when other people are standing against you. Even when people who are powerful, people who are strong, people who are dangerous are coming against you. True friends are those who will stay loyal. Loyalty is one of those things that is underrated. It's almost become old-fashioned. And yet loyalty is one of the greatest things we can offer our friends. In a world of fickle, superficial, shallow friendships, loyalty is so rare. But when you find somebody who's loyal to you, when you find someone who sticks with you through thick and thin, when you find someone who's not just a fair weather friend, but who's there no matter what, who you can depend on, that as long as they're with you, you're going to be fine, that they will not gossip about you, that they'll not do wee innuendos about you behind your back, that you know that they are for you. That is so, so special. But when you discover that people you've only ever been loyal to have been disloyal to you or betrayed you, it's one of the most painful things that can happen. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I have. People who I've loved and been loyal to have hurt me deeply and betrayed me. And it's incredibly painful. It leaves you reeling. It leaves you wondering who you can trust. It leaves you thinking, was that just that whole relationship just a farce all along? Like, who really is my friend? People you trusted, you shared your heart with. You thought you would do life together forever, and then you find out they've betrayed you. It shakes your world. It just rocks you to the core. And that's where David finds himself, because David looked up to Saul. David had served Saul. David had honored Saul. He had never manipulated. He had never tried to, even though he's anointed to be king, he never tried to do things the wrong way. He always honored Saul. He knew that if he was going to get there, he'd get there in God's time. He was always loyal to Saul. He had always only served Saul. Even though Saul had thrown 2 spears at him at this stage. And I wondered about that. At this stage, Saul has thrown 2 spears at David, and David's still there. And I wondered, did David excuse it? And I wondered, did the people around Saul, because I wondered if people say things like, he's just having one of his bad days. You know what Saul's like? He gets a bit down. Oh, don't pay any heed. It's not your fault. It's nothing to do. He'll come out of it. I honestly think David believed the best about Saul and wanted to continue to believe the best. In David's eyes, Saul was still king, and David honored him in that role. But there came a point, even for David, there came a point when he knew he would have to leave, when he knew it was too dangerous for him to stay there. And that's where we're going to finish up today, looking at chapter 20. Then David fled and went to Jonathan and asked, what have I done wrong? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father? Can we get these verses on the screen, guys? Are they on it? No? 20 verses 1 and 2. That he is trying to kill me. Never, Jonathan replied, you are not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why should he hide this from me? It isn't so. So, David now realizes that Saul's trying to kill him. David now realizes that as many chances as he's given this guy is intent on destroying him. And so him and Jonathan come up with a plan just to prove it for the last time. There's going to be a big religious feast for 3 days. They had those in Israel at the time, and everyone was expected to be there. And David is now married actually to Saul's daughter, Michal. So David's his son-in-law. And David's obviously going to be expected to be there. But they come up with this plan that David's not going to appear and see how Saul reacts. Because Saul's trying to kill him, and this is the perfect opportunity. And so if David's not there, how Saul reacts will determine whether Saul really is intent on destroying him. So the first night David's not there, and I think Saul just puts it down to, well, he's probably doing something else. The next night he's not there, and Saul begins to get confused and ask questions. And he says to Jonathan, Jonathan, where's David? And Jonathan tells a wee porky at this stage. Jonathan says, well, actually, he went back to Bethlehem to his own family. He wanted to have this feast with his own family. And look at what we read, verses 30 to 33. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. That's actually a nice way of putting it. If you go to some other translations, I mean, it literally, you can imagine, the Bible translators really had a bad day that day. You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse? He can't even say his name, son of Jesse, to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you. As long as that son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. I send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Saul gets into such a rage that now anyone who sides with his enemy has become his enemy. Even his own son. And he throws a spear at his own son. You see, in the previous chapters, Jonathan had been able to talk sense into his dad. At this point, his dad has lost all reason. He's lost all ability to discern right and wrong. And so there's only one thing David can do to stay alive, and that is to get out of there as fast as he can. Look at the end of chapter 20. Jonathan said to David, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is a witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left. Then David left. And Jonathan went back to the town. If you could see 5 years into the future, would you want to? I was thinking about that recently. Somebody asked the question. If you could see the next 5 years of your life, would you want to? And I don't mean to get the football scores so you can go into the bookies, okay? I mean, literally, if you could see how your life... And my first instinct was yes. And then I began to think about the past 5 years and all that's happened since 2014 and how I could never have imagined or predicted or contemplated the twists and turns of life. And if I had known all that would happen since 2014, I think it would have absolutely terrified me. How things just turned out so much different in so many ways than I thought. And I'm kind of glad God doesn't show us the whole picture up front, because actually I don't think we could handle it. And I was thinking, the reason I ask this is David here. David has been anointed king. He's been brought to the palace. He's played the harp for Saul. He's gone out against Goliath. He's struck down the Philistine. He's won other battles. People are singing songs about him in the street. He's best friends with the king's son, Jonathan. Jonathan sees the royalty on him and puts his robes on him. He's married to the king's daughter. Doesn't it look like everything's just fallen into line? I'm sure David thought it'll be weeks, maybe a month or two, and I'm going to be in the throne. Everything seemed to be falling into line. And then it all begins to unravel. And suddenly, there's a man, the most powerful man in the land, is determined to destroy you. And you have to leave. And the only way you can leave is to slip out through your window under the cover of darkness in secret and run away on your own. When David arrived into the city, it was to noise and to songs and to crowds and to celebrations. when he leaves as a fugitive and slips off into the darkness. But better to leave than to stay and die. And my point is simply this, that there's sometimes you've just got to move on. There's sometimes in some situations, in some places, that you've just got to move on. That for you to stay there is going to harm you. It's going to be more detrimental to your health. It's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect your mental health. It's going to maybe damage your reputation. There's sometimes when you just need to move on. When you just need to cut the cord and go, I can't stay here any longer. It could be in a workplace where it's just become toxic. It could be in a relationship where it's abusive. I hadn't planned to share this, but I feel like there's something on this in this service. That last year I wrote a book on transition and about endings and beginnings, and talked about at times you need to move on. And in the middle of writing that book over 40 days and sending the chapters out to people every day, I got an email from somebody, and I'll read some of it to you. I wanted to encourage you regarding the book. Yeah, and then she talks about her sister. She says, recently we've all been devastated to find out that my sister has been emotionally abused, manipulated, and controlled since the beginning of her marriage 14 years ago. She hid it because she lived under such fear and a threat that she would never see her children. The stories unfolding that have been hidden from us make us sick to the stomach. We don't know how we missed it, but he was a typical abuser, plausible and charming to the outside world. My sister felt she couldn't leave because of how he trapped and threatened her, and because it was a Christian marriage, and she felt she had to make it work, because divorce isn't biblical, etc. He has worn her down so much and eroded her sense of worth that she can't think for herself anymore. Anyway, it's a very long story, but the short version is, we sat down with Jude yesterday afternoon, and Dad read chapters 10 and 11 from your book to her. She's phoning Women's Aid this morning and now knows that she is free to go. In fact, she has to. It's her only option. There's a long journey of healing and recovery ahead, but the steps are being taken, and her and the kids will move into better and healthier times. You know, sometimes you've just got to move on. That email affected me profoundly, actually, at that stage. There's sometimes you've just got to move on. There's sometimes when you've just got to decide, you know what, I can't stay here any longer. And David realizes that yes, he might be promised to be king, but he'll not be king if he's dead. And so he's got to trust God. He thought it would happen now, but it hasn't happened as he planned. He thought this word from God would be any day. But it's all gone upside down. And so he leaves on his own. He leaves Jonathan, his best friend, behind. And yet, over the next 8 to 10 years, God would do a work in his life. You see, David wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared. He needed to be developed and matured. But most of all, David needed to understand this, that there's actually only one friend that he could depend on, and that was God. That's why he went into the wilderness for 8 to 10 years. That everything and everyone else was stripped away from him. And he discovered that when everybody rejects you, when everybody turns their back on you, when everybody leaves you, there's only one that you can turn to. And later we're going to see there's one stage where he's completely alone, and it says this: David strengthened himself in the Lord. And I want to finish where I want to finish just with saying to you that people will come and go from your life. People will reject you and betray you. People who you love will leave you, sometimes through natural causes. But there's one who will never leave. And that sounds like such a cliche, even as I say it. But there's one who will never leave. There's a friend who will stick closer than a brother. Jesus said this. He said, greater love has no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. You see, friendship is easy to talk about. It's easy to declare. Who's willing to lay down their life for you? Jesus was. Let me finish with a story. A woman called the minister to see her husband, who was very ill. And the minister wasn't sure if the husband was a Christian or not. But as he got chatting to him, the husband was in bed. As he got chatting to him, he realized through his language that he was a believer. He was a Christian. And the minister noticed there was a chair sitting there beside the bed. And he said, oh, is there somebody who comes in and talks to you? And the minister said, or the man in bed, the sick man said, close the door over. And he closed the bedroom door over. And he said to the minister, don't tell my wife this. She'll think I'm crazy. But when I was young, I was trying to learn to pray. And I had no idea. I found it really hard to pray. And so I talked to somebody about it, and they said, why don't you put a chair in the room and imagine Jesus is in the chair? And just talk to him like he's a friend. And he says, I've been doing that ever since. I don't tell anybody. But some days I talk to him for hours. I just pour out my heart to him. I just imagine he's in this chair, and I tell him all the stuff that I'm going through. And I pour out my pain. And other days I just have wee comments with him and wee conversations. And I've been doing it for years and years. He says, but please don't tell my wife this. About a month later, the minister got a call to say that the man had passed away. And he went to visit the family, and he said to the wife, how did he die? What happened to him? And she said, well, the sickness finally got to him. But the strangest thing was the way we found him. When I came in, he was dead. But there's a chair sitting beside the bed. And I noticed how he had pushed himself out of bed and put his head in the chair and died there with his head in the chair. Folks, everybody needs a friend who's there. We all need one who's going to be there when we slip into glory. And there's only one person, that's Jesus. And I love my wife, and I love my family. I love my friends. But ultimately, when everything and everyone else is stripped away, if you've got Jesus, you'll be okay. It'll be tough, but you'll be okay. And that's what David finds. He's got God as he goes into the darkest period of his life. And we're going to look at that in the weeks and months ahead. But can I just encourage you today, if you are here and you've never started that friendship with Jesus, can I encourage you today to start it? He is a friend who will be faithful to the end. He will never leave you. He will never betray you. He's given his life that he might have a friendship with you. The worship team are going to come up.